We have a crew member aboard who's showing signs of stress and fatigue. Reaction time down 9 to 12%. Associational rating norm -3.
That's much too low a rating.
He's becoming irritable and quarrelsome, yet he refuses to take rest and rehabilitation. Now, he has that right, but we found...
Crewman's right ends where the safety of the ship begins. Now, that man will go ashore on my orders. What's his name?
James Kirk.
Bridge to all decks. Wow, I sure do love saying that because that means it is time for a brand new episode of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mantz.
And I'm Steve Morris. And I feel like we need a little bit of levity in our life. I feel like we need to, I don't know, Scott, relax and take a little time off. Maybe have some shore leave.
Shore sounds like a great idea. You know what? The crew of the Enterprise sure has been through a lot in the last 3 months. They're going to let their hair down, and so are we as we do our deep dive into an episode that I think we can describe as a fan favorite. But is it a superior episode, and how does it hold up after 55 years? We're going to get into all those things when we talk about Shore Leave. Steve, what are your initial thoughts on this episode when you first saw it? What are your memories?
Well, this has always been one of the fun episodes. And it's always been one that tonally, I think particularly for where we are in the first season, this is one of the biggest tonal shifts. I mean, we've now gone from some really, really serious, heavy episodes and a surprisingly high percentage that are really tragic to one that's kind of light. And even though there's a quote unquote death in the middle of it, it's never taken that seriously. And it's so nice to have a lot of fun. And this is what I'll tell you. Watching it this time, as we said many times on Enterprise Incidents, I had a whole new epiphany, and that has been the growing understanding of this guy named James T. Kirk, who I thought I knew. And the more I think about him, the more I realize I didn't know him at all. And I'm really excited to talk about that in this episode.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are listening to Enterprise Incidents for the first time, this is what I'll tell you. When Steve Morris has an epiphany, boy, does he have an epiphany. I got to tell you, his epiphanies have led to our very, very best conversations here on Enterprise Incidents. And I cannot wait to hear about maybe a few epiphanies between the two of us that we have had about this episode. Because like you, Steve, rewatching it for the sake of Enterprise Incidents, knowing that we are going to do a deep dive, certainly has made me reevaluate my feelings for this episode. But what I will say is that I always felt like Shore Leave was a fun episode. There is no other episode like this in the original series. Shore Leave, I think, represents Star Trek firing on all cylinders. It's the culmination of everything that we had seen up to this point during the production of Star Trek. But it is also, like you pointed out, Steve, so tonally different from everything else that preceded it. And this is an episode in which the tones seamlessly shift during the course of this episode. This is an episode that it's more science fantasy than science fiction. And that was a problem with the network. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I love the wild range of tones that this episode has. I love how open it is because with the exception of Miri, which was shot on a studio backlight, this really is the first true episode that was shot out on location, on 2 locations. There's a great score from the amazing Gerald Fried, his very first score for Star Trek. You have that awesome, almost 5-minute fight scene between Kirk and Finnegan, which is an amazing fight scene, beautifully choreographed. You learn so much about the background of our captain, James T. Kirk. We have another love interest for McCoy. But my personal memory of this episode, Steve, is that even though I had seen it quite a few times throughout the 70s in syndication, it was in 1981. Okay.
All right.
What I remember about watching this episode in 1981 is that Shore Leave is the very first Star Trek episode that I recorded on my Betamax.
I don't know how you remember those kinds of specifics. That's so amazing to me.
Well, you're talking to a person who has an affinity, shall we say, for movie release dates. So when it comes to Star Trek, I remember the great details like that. So what happened was Star Trek was on every night at 7:00 on Channel 17, WPHL Channel 17 in Philadelphia. And then in 1981, they moved it to 11:30 at night. And well, that was just too late for me because I had to get up and go to school every day. So the only day I could really stay up and watch it was Friday nights. But then when my dad got our first VCR, and in his infinite wisdom, he got a Betamax because he knew that the quality was better, but they were also more expensive. Yeah, they were more expensive, which is why the Betamaxes obviously ran out commercially. But so I had set it up and I learned how to use it. And one night I set it up to record. And, back then I knew that there was an order to Star Trek, but I didn't have that order memorized. So I set up the timer to record at 11:30 p.m. And then the next morning I went down into the basement before I went to school, and I just wanted to watch the teaser to see what episode it was. And that episode was Shore Leave. So Shore Leave was the very first episode of Star Trek that I ever recorded on the Betamax, on the VCR. And so I got into this pattern where I would set the timer, record the episode, go downstairs the very next morning, watch the teaser, and then when I got home from school, I would watch the rest of it. So that lasted for quite a while, I would say a couple of years. But that was my first real introduction to Shore Leave, because I could now watch it over and over again when I wanted to.
Wow. Do you still have these Betamax tapes?
I have one of them, not the one with Shore Leave, which is really too bad because that would have been such a personal, such a cherished memento, such a valued memento for my childhood. But I do have a couple of videotapes, a couple of cassette tapes from when I held it up. But, this is an episode that, I mean, when you talk to other Star Trek fans, they really love it. And it's like the first sort of full on comedic episode that they did, not including Naked Time, which had its moments. But this was an episode that around the time that they were filming Shore Leave. So the good news, Steve, was this. Star Trek got great news. The cast, the crew, the producers, Desilu Studios. NBC got their mid-season pickup for Star Trek for a full season. So great news, everybody. We still have jobs lasting us for the rest of the season. Now the bad news, my friend. So the budget per episode up to this point was $193,500. Starting with Shore Leave, the budget per episode went down from this point on to $185,000. So it lost $8,500 a week per episode. And this episode cost $199,654. Wow. So all the money, Steve, that they saved doing the envelope portion of the menagerie, they had to lose almost $15,000 of that because Shore Leave went so far over budget. They filmed the episode between October 19th and October 27th, 1966. It took 7 days to film, one day over schedule. And it was the 18th episode to film, but it was actually the 15th episode to air. And it did so on December 29th, 1966, making it the last first run episode of the series to air in 1966. It was written by Theodore Sturgeon. And you probably recognize that name because Theodore Sturgeon also wrote the very, very classic top tier episode of Star Trek called Amok Time.
Wow.
Kind of makes sense when you look at the tone of Shore Leave and the tone of Amok Time. Really out there episodes, both of them. Now, this episode was directed by Robert Spar. It was his one and only Star Trek episode. Robert Spar had done a lot of TV, 77 Sunset Strip, The Wild Wild West, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and Lassie. This was his only Star Trek episode because, for one thing, he took too long to set up his shots, and his directing style kind of rubbed some of the actors the wrong way. They didn't really like him. But Robert H. Justman was very happy with his work, but because it went one day over schedule and the other actors didn't like him, that kind of sealed his fate. Now, here's the thing about Robert Spar. He was killed in a plane crash in 1969 while scouting locations for a shoot. The pilot was also killed. But Steve, his passenger, who survived with very serious injuries, but he did survive. Are you ready for this? I didn't know this until I was doing research for this episode. Robert Spar's passenger was Jerry Finnerman.
Oh my God.
The cinematographer for the first 2.5 years of the original Star Trek. Jerry Finnerman was with Robert Spar in that plane crash. Thankfully, Jerry Finnerman survived with grave injuries, but he still did survive. And, what a tragic end for Robert Spar. But Theodore Sturgeon, not only did he write Amok Time, but he was a book writer, a science fiction writer, a noted science fiction writer, the kind of science fiction writer that Gene Roddenberry went after to write for Star Trek, to give credibility to Star Trek as a science fiction series. The irony being that Shore Leave, his first episode that he wrote was really more of a science fantasy, but he wrote the book More Than Human. He wrote the It short story. He wrote for TV. He wrote for The Invaders and Land of the Lost. But the other notable, very, very, very notable aspect of Shore Leave is that it was composed beautifully, I have to say, by Gerald Fried, making his very first score for Star Trek. He also did the scores for Cat's Ball, Friday's Child, Amok Time, and The Paradise Syndrome. But you got to agree that the score for this episode is just magnificent. The way it too shifts tones, just like the aspects of the episode. So Gerald Fried, absolutely an amazing composer. He also scored the films The Killing and Paths of Glory, both directed by Stanley Kubrick.
Wow.
He did 2 Stanley Kubrick movies.
Those are 2 great movies too. I like both of them a lot. Paths of Glory is one of the great war films of all time. I mean, it's an unbelievably powerful movie.
Did you do any of those films on Cinephiles?
Nope.
Maybe you should.
Yeah, we definitely talked about Paths of Glory when an actor passes away, we tend to try to do a movie to honor them. And when Kirk Douglas passed away, it was between Paths of Glory and Spartacus, and we finally decided, well, we got to do Spartacus. But Paths of Glory is a fantastic movie.
Well, that would have been enough if he just did 2 Stanley Kubrick movies and the Star Trek episodes. But he also did the score for the original Roots miniseries from 1977, plus its follow-up miniseries, Roots: The Next Generation. And he did, you're not going to believe how many episodes of Gilligan's Island Gerald Fried scored. Are you ready?
Go for it.
51 episodes of Gilligan's Island.
I'm sorry, if someone had told me that Kubrick's composer for Paths of Glory was also on Gilligan's Island.
Isn't that nuts? That is crazy. But he also did 45 episodes of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Gerald Fried, you're going to love this. So back in 2012, when the 15 CD box set of all the music from the original series was released, it was every single note ever recorded for the original series. It was like the holy grail of Star Trek, one of the most significant releases for the original series since the very first videotapes came out in the early 80s. So even though some of the music had existed, now you got all of it. And to mark the occasion, they had an event at the Egyptian Theater in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, where they showed 2 of the episodes that Gerald Fried scored, including, of course, Amok Time. Right. And in between the episodes, Gerald Fried, who was still with us, he came out and he did a little Q&A with the moderator, and he played his bit from The Paradise Syndrome with the flute. Remember that part of the score, that opens the... So you're sitting there watching this composing legend play music from the original Star Trek series live. It was a moment I'll never forget. I believe it was Jeff Bond moderated the Q&A because he was one of the producers on the box set of the music and also did the liner notes. But that was a hell of a night.
I just want to point out one thing that I know all of our listeners know, and we've mentioned already several times, that they reuse these pieces of music over and over and over again. And I just want to, that means that a piece that might have been composed for Mud's Women, or a whole bunch of pieces that are in Shore Leave, they might appear in more episodes than characters of Star Trek, more episodes than Riley, certainly, probably more episodes than Yeoman Rand. There's some pieces of music that maybe they were used 20 times. They're like just huge parts of the show. Absolutely. And when you get to watch the series as often as we did, and you watch the episodes where they use stock music, and I know the episode that it was originally composed for. That's when you know that you really are doing like a deep dive into Star Trek, when you can tell the episode where these reused scores originally came from. Now for an episode that was really outside the box, for an episode that I feel just exuded so much confidence, like when you're watching these episodes in production order, the series just became something very, very different when Gene Kuhn became the day-to-day producer and Roddenberry took a step back as the executive producer. And I think that this episode in particular, Shore Leave, feels so much like a Gene Kuhn episode. Yeah, I think so too. Despite the fact that there were so many problems with the writing of this episode, that Roddenberry went to the set, the Africa USA set where they filmed all the stuff at the Glade, and he brought a typewriter with him and set up a table, and he was rewriting scenes on the spot because there were so many problems with this episode. And this story outline was, written by Theodore Sturgeon on May 10th, 1966. He wrote a first draft teleplay that was in June. And then he did a rewrite in which he changed the name from Shore Leave to Finnegan's Planet. Finnegan was the original name of Finnegan. But then when he did his second draft teleplay in September, he changed it back to Shore Leave. Then Gene Kuhn did a polish on October 14th. He did a rough step outline on October 18th. But then Gene Roddenberry rushed revised pages while the episode was being shot on October 19th, 20th, and 21st. And the reason why Roddenberry had to hightail it to the set was because there was a crossing communication, because everybody was dealing with memos. And the network was initially concerned that the script was too surreal, that it was too much science fantasy and not enough science fiction. So he was going to have it changed, and he was going to tell Gene Kuhn to have it changed. But then Gene Roddenberry was burned out. He went away on vacation. And then Gene Kuhn did his rewrite, in which he actually played up the fantasy elements of it. And that's why Gene Roddenberry had to go out and rewrite scenes on the spot. And Roddenberry was not a fan at all of the giant rabbit scene. But by the time he realized that was actually happening, the scene had been filmed and it was too late. But I just think that despite all the writing challenges, it's a fantastic episode. Agreed. Would you like to know some of the things going on in the world while they were filming this thing? I can't wait to hear what was going on in the world. So as you said, it was filmed between October 19th and the 27th of 1966. On October 19th, Bobby Orr, one of the greatest hockey players of all time, played his very, very first game in the NHL. On the same day, this is a really important moment in Hollywood. Paramount Pictures, which was on the verge of bankruptcy, was bought by Gulf Western. Ooh. And this is really the beginning of what we would call corporate Hollywood, where big, huge corporations became involved in these studios. What's interesting about the Paramount one is it's also right at the rise of Robert Evans, one of the great studio executives of all time and someone responsible for all sorts of stuff. So Paramount, where Star Trek is being shot, is being taken over by a huge corporation. What's interesting, Steve, is that Paramount, in 1966, when this episode was being filmed, Paramount was right next door to Desilu Studios. Like the whole Paramount lot as we know it on Melrose Avenue right now, it was actually only half the size, because there was the Paramount side and there was the Desilu side. So the year after
the Gulf of Western merger, this announcement happened, Lucille Ball did what she feared that she was going to have to do, because between Star Trek and Mission Impossible, she was bleeding money and it was bankrupting the studio. So she sold Desilu to Paramount.
Wow.
And they basically knocked down the walls between the two studios. And there was actually a ribbon cutting ceremony where, Lucy cut the ribbon to say, Paramount's now this whole studio. But internally, Lucille Ball was just devastated that she had to do that.
It's what's crazy to think about that is how much more important Mission Impossible and Star Trek are than practically all the other things in television at that time.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But they were also bleeding money. This one's tragic, and I really knew nothing about it. On October 20th in Wales, which obviously is a huge coal mining area, there is a slag heap, which is just a big bunch of coal and rock, and it's sitting right above a school. And on October 20th, it collapsed in a massive avalanche, killing 116 school kids and 28 adults.
Oh, my goodness. That's tragic. That's just awful.
A massive, I just can't imagine the scope of that kind of a tragedy.
You know what? Do you watch The Crown?
No, I've never watched it.
Okay, because The Crown on Netflix, they actually had an episode that dealt with that tragedy, and
wow.
And I knew just from history that had happened, but to see it played out in this episode of The Crown, which is an amazing show.
That's right.
Yeah, interesting.
On October 23rd, Che Guevara left Cuba. And this is obviously one of the most important people in the Cuban Revolution, a person that is controversial by any standard and invokes extremely strong feelings everywhere. And under assumed name, he flew to Moscow. And then under another assumed name, he flew to Paraguay. And on a new assumed name, he flew to Vienna, then to Bolivia, and eventually he was killed in Bolivia on October 9th, 1967. So this is the beginning of the last phase of Che Guevara's life.
Unbelievable. What a life.
On October 25th, the People's Republic of China successfully fired their first nuclear missile. And you see that is a moment of completely changing world politics from that point forward. Lyndon Johnson visited Vietnam for the first time, South Vietnam, on October 26th. And October 27th, the last day of filming Shore Leave, our crew and cast could go home and sit down in front of their television sets and watch It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, for the first time.
Oh, wow. That's so great. Oh, my gosh. What a week. Look at what was going on in just 1 week while they were filming a Star Trek episode. I mean, you're driving to work, you're driving to the set, maybe you're driving to Vasquez Rocks for part of this episode. You gotta put the radio on and you're listening to the news, maybe in the morning on AM radio, and you're on your way to film a Star Trek episode. And that's what's happening. Awesome stuff.
Shall we jump into the show?
Let's dive in to Shore Leave.
So we start on the bridge, and what I find so interesting is, in a weird way, this is the situation in our first pilot, In the Cage, which is we have a tired crew. And we hear there's a landing party down checking out this planet, and Kirk's back hurts. And I love the setup of Spock has walked over to him, and unbeknownst to Kirk, a yeoman Barrows, is rubbing his back, and he's going, oh yeah, right there, a little harder, push there.
Take it in there, Mr. Spock.
And then he realized it's not Mr. Spock.
Thank you, yeoman, that's sufficient.
You know what's interesting, Steve? In the first, I would say 30 seconds of this episode, you pick up so much about not just Shore Leave, but about the direction that Star Trek is now going. For one thing, it's worth noting that in the original version of Shore Leave, we see the Enterprise orbiting this mysterious planet. The Enterprise is going from right to left. And up to this, with the exception of Mirror Mirror, with the ISS Enterprise, where the Enterprise is flying from right to left after the ion storm, this is the only episode where that happens. And Robert Spar just wanted to shake it up and show something a little different, but he had to use a distant shot of the Enterprise. Otherwise, you could have told that it was inverted, and you will see, NCC 1701 in reverse. But the other thing that I really picked up on it and appreciated more is just how vibrant it feels, how the cinematography, Jerry Finnerman's cinematography, it's different now. The bridge is brighter. The colors are more vibrant. They pop better. The music by Gerald Fried is more upbeat and, hate to use the word again, but vibrant. There's a confidence to Shore Leave that is immediately noticeable, maybe sparred, no pun intended to the director's name, by the mid-season pickup that they got. Maybe the Gene Kuhn just brought something new and fresh to the series. But from the beginning, you could tell that this was going to be different, that Star Trek was going to be a different show from this point forward. And you can just see how much the Enterprise crew feels more relaxed with each other, certainly than they had up to this point. Their guard is down, but Steve, perhaps too much in this episode.
Well, I think one of the big tonal shifts is that while there are fun things that happen in earlier episodes, like at the beginning of Naked Time, Star Trek up to this point has not been fun.
Right.
It's not. And this, right from the very beginning, as you point out, tonally, we're being light. There's a really light death touch rather than the heavier touch that we've seen before. And right away we hear that the crew is tired and that Kirk is tired.
After what this ship has been through in the last 3 months, there's not a crewman aboard who's not in need of a rest. Myself accepted, of course.
Steve, the funny thing is, the way that we've been thinking about Star Trek chronologically as canon, which I think just opens so much to a new analysis of Star Trek. So they talk about how the crew has been through a lot over the last 3 months. Well, let's look at what the crew of the Enterprise has been through in the last 3 months. Captain Kirk himself was split into two people. He was tortured, by the Tanos field. You had the battle with the Romulans in Balance of Terror, and you had to fight not just one, but two diseases in Miri and the Naked Time. You're damn right they've been through a lot in the last 3 months, and you're damn right that they need this shore leave.
Well, the one thing that's fun that I would add to it is the one person who says, I don't need a rest. What was the last thing he did? He was just on the Galileo 7 and he had his worst failure ever. And it's just like Spock seems a little bit cocky.
Totally he does.
Considering what he's just been through. Kirk heads off to his quarters and we go down to the planet into the most beautiful, idyllic setting we've ever seen on Star Trek. And partially because, as you point out, we're actually out on location now.
You're out on location at Africa, USA, which is a wildlife preserve about 40 miles north of Los Angeles. And look, Miri was great to the extent that they were shooting on this backlot where they shot the Andy Griffith Show and so many other things, but it was a studio backlot. Now you really are out in the open. And the paradise-like setting of this episode just opens it up so much. And plus with the tone and the score and the more relaxed feeling that the Enterprise crew have with each other, like everybody sort of feels like everything's falling into place. Like Star Trek with Shore Leave is really starting to hit its stride.
And we see Sulu and McCoy, and they're talking about this planet that has no animals, no people, no worries. And I had to say, I think DeForest Kelley really shines in this episode. I think you see all sorts of stuff that actor was capable of that we don't get to see very much going forward. But man, he's just really, really good.
I agree completely. This was a great episode for DeForest Kelley. Showed great range, despite the fact that he is kind of missing through a good portion of it. But you still feel his loss, and that's the key. And the great thing about the scene is the chemistry between George Takei and DeForest Kelley. You could see that everybody's feeling more comfortable with each other. You could see that even though this is a very atypical episode of Star Trek, I still felt like they were able to go a little further with things, and their chemistry and their dynamic was more fully realized. And this is a beautiful scene because you're seeing these two very tired crew members, in this open air after being cooped up on the Enterprise. It's a great feeling.
I think you make a great point. And one of the things that I think people misconstrue about how stories work is there's a thing, you probably heard this, that Hollywood wants the same but different. And so what frequently happens is they go, oh, we did a Star Trek episode and it was really dark and had lots of action and and it was good. Well, that's what the audience wants. So let's just do that over and over and over again. And what Star Trek understands is we like these characters and we really enjoy them. And yeah, we could see a really dark action oriented episode and we can see a really fun episode and the characters can remain true to themselves and we can have a really different experience with them. And that's just one of the things that makes this such a fun show.
You know, you have to see this place to believe it. It's like something out of Alice in Wonderland.
Ding.
First of all, I don't think this looks like Alice in Wonderland at all. This looks like maybe where Alice was before she went to Wonderland, but Wonderland is a much weirder place than this. And then the other moment that I think is so important is we're talking about whether or not the captain is going to come down. And McCoy says,
you've got your problems, I've got mine, but he's got ours plus his plus 430 other people.
Yeah, wow. That really hits it on the head, doesn't it? And the other thing, too, is how, again, sort of continuing along with some chronology here, with some canon, is where does Sulu go? He goes off to collect a couple of blades and to check the flora, because as we saw in The Man Trap, in addition to being a helmsman, he is also a botanist. So it's great to see that dynamic. You know, we talked elsewhere about how there was so much more for George Takei, and he really had a lot to do. His character really did shine in the first season. And I think that even with the lower budget, first of all, it feels like a true ensemble. But also, the other thing about Shore Leave is that this is one of the few times throughout the original series where we see the Enterprise truly exploring a strange new world. You know, they're not responding to a distress call. They're not going to a star base. They're not transferring supplies from one ship to another to stop a plague. They're not picking up scientists from a frozen station. Like this is a completely unexplored planet. They are here for Shore Leave, but they are also here to do their jobs. And we find out just how much they are ill-equipped to do just that.
Yeah, because in the next moment, after Sulu goes off to hunt down some blades of grass, out comes the giant rabbit.
Oh, my paws and whiskers. I'll be late.
And then out comes Alice, who asks,
excuse me, sir. Have you seen a rather large white rabbit with a yellow waistcoat and white gloves hereabouts?
And Bones' awkward point to where the rabbit went. And she runs off and he yells, Sulu!
Sulu!
You know, a lot of things about this moment. I agree with you. DeForest Kelley's reaction is just perfect, spot on. But also, like, they're walking around and they're embracing the openness of this beautiful, beautiful unexplored world. And the score that accompanies that moment is really like, you know, full of so much optimism and openness as well. And then just like that, the tone of the episode shifts, the tone of Gerald Fried's score shifts to something playful. Now, the actor in the rabbit costume is an actor who has appeared in 64 episodes of the original series.
Wow.
Now, this actor, his name is Billy Blackburn, and you know him, and everyone else who's listening knows him, that for the duration of the first season and the other times in seasons 2 and 3 when maybe Chekhov wasn't in the episode, he was the navigator who just never said a word. And in the episode, A Piece of the Action, Scotty actually gave him a name, Lieutenant Hadley, but he was a stand-in for the other actors. And he also did some of the test makeup. He actually was involved in a lot of aspects of the show, but it is actually Billy Blackburn who was in the rabbit costume. And in case you were wondering, Steve, Alice was played by young actress Marcia Brown.
Okay. And I hope that Billy Blackburn also made a good living going to conventions and signing autographs, because what a impressive thing to have on your resume. Did you say 63 episodes?
64. He was 64. Wow. So I'm glad actually, that is a great question, Steve, because not only did he go to conventions, but Billy Blackburn actually had the foresight to shoot home movies on the set of the original series. Wow.
Wow.
There are some great home movies that he took during the filming of Arena. It's probably on YouTube somewhere. So I think if you Google Billy Blackburn's,
let's try to put it on our Facebook page.
Yeah, that's
so
a great
people
idea.
Can find him. Yeah. Billy Blackburn's home movies of Star Trek. That is so
and
cool.
It's a lot. It's like BTS of the original series. It's awesome. So
I had never heard that Gene Roddenberry was rewriting this episode until you said it. I didn't know he didn't like the rabbit, but he is 100% right. And let me tell you why I think he's right.
Why? I like the rabbit.
And this is like, if this script had come into me in my screenwriting class, this is what I would say, is that in general, when there's a weird, mysterious thing happening, you start with the most subtle one. Is that you start with one that has deniability, where McCoy can go, oh, maybe I saw that, maybe I didn't, maybe that's real, maybe it isn't. Something that's subtle so that then there can be doubt around it. When you start with the big guy in the rabbit suit and we know that it's real, you clue in the audience 100% immediately that there is something mystical and crazy and bizarre going on. And so if you'd start, is that you in general, and you think about every horror movie, every mystical movie, they always good ones start small. And this one starts really, really big.
Okay, I completely agree with you to that extent. That having a moment where McCoy really does truly doubt whether or not what he saw was real, or maybe it was a figment of his imagination. This clearly was not a figment of his imagination. No. I mean, there's it's not a figment of our imagination either. Maybe I think you're right. I think they did go too big. But you know what, Steve? For the sake of a classic Star Trek teaser, we're going to end that teaser on a whoa moment for this episode. That is a great whoa moment, and it's a different whoa moment than we've seen in any episode before, and it was different from any other teaser that happened after this. Again, so much about Shore Leave is unique to Shore Leave, and because it is more science fiction or more science fantasy than fiction.
Well, and I'll say, although I disagree with it as a choice at the beginning, they get great mileage out of it for jokes going throughout the episode. They do great stuff with it. And that was our teaser. And we come back in Act 1. And I think a key detail, and I don't know if it happens any other time in Star Trek, is Kirk stumbles on the star date in the captain's log.
Captain's log, stardate 3025.3.
I think that's a great choice. And then we see him. He's with Yeoman Barrows, who I think is great in this episode.
She's great. I mean, can we just talk about Yeoman Barrows? Okay, first of all, obviously, it does not take a rocket scientist to know that in the earlier versions of this story outline, who do you think it was?
Well, I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but of course it must have been Yeoman Rand.
It was absolutely Yeoman Rand. And in the earlier versions, because it was Yeoman Rand, some of the plot points between Kirk and Rand, of course, crossed the line, and they got a little too chummy and a little too personal. But by this point, it was Rand was out of the show, and Emily Banks played Yeoman Barrows. And at the time in the 60s, just like everybody else on Star Trek practically, she made appearances on The Wild Wild West and Death Valley Days. Now, here's the thing about Yeoman Barrows. I think Emily Banks did a superb job playing her, like to the point where I really wish we could have seen more of Yeoman Barrows in the future. Now, when Janice Rand was in the earlier drafts, it was actually Robert Justman who suggested that she be replaced with another Yeoman Barrows. Now, Robert Justman was a big fan of Emily Banks and thought she did a terrific job playing Yeoman Barrows. And he even suggested that she was so good and so strong, like, hey, let's have her come back. Let's have her be a recurring character. But it was actually Gene Kuhn who nixed that idea. And the reason for that is because where we see the relationship between McCoy and Barrows go, because it does get too personal, and because there's a lot more going on than flirtation here. Like, they are obviously very, very into each other. They would have had to address that if she came back to another episode. So Gene Kuhn just took the easy way out and said, now she's out. Let's get someone else.
And even it seems like it's really going around the Enterprise that the captain needs a break.
Sir? I don't see your name in any of the shore parties.
Well, I may be tired, yeoman, but I'm not falling apart. Dismissed.
And she kind of reluctantly says, "Aye, sir." And now in comes Spock, and we're talking about shore leave. And Spock says, like, we don't do vacations, is what he's basically saying. When we rest, we just shut down and rest. We don't use a lot of energy in order to rest. That doesn't seem logical.
By the way, we've seen that happen.
That's
in
right.
the episode, remember in By Any Other Name, when they're being held captive by the Kelvins and they're being held in that cell, you know, Kirk even says to Spock, don't the Vulcans have like a trance? And Spock says, we prefer it to your so-called vacation.
I think it's such an interesting thing that we're talking about rest and relaxation and how important it is. And it's like, it literally goes back to the very beginnings of the Hebrew Torah, is that a day of rest, that this idea that we actually need to recharge is really, really important. And it's one that I am not all that good at. I tend to work, you know, all the time. So
yeah, I know. Me too. And I just, when I'm on vacation, I feel guilty about being on vacation.
Well, actually, I bring work on vacation. So that just like I'm going away. As I told you, I'm going away in a couple of days for my mom's 80th birthday. I'm probably going to bring some cinephiles and Enterprise incidents, and I'll probably do a little bit of editing because I got stuff to get done. You know?
Thank you for doing that.
And McCoy calls up, asks if Kirk is beaming down, he's really honest about what is going on. He doesn't try to cover this up at all. He says,
either our scouting probes and detectors are malfunctioning, and all us scouts careless and beauty intoxicated, or I must report myself unfit for duty.
And Spock and Kirk think that he's joking, and they really think he's joking when he says,
on this supposedly uninhabited planet, I just saw a large rabbit pull a gold watch from his vest and claim that he was late.
I love that Kirk kind of runs with the joke.
Yeah.
Because he thinks that McCoy is joking. And here's the thing that struck me about watching the episode this time, Steve. You know, like, shouldn't they all kind of be taking this a little more seriously? This is an unexplored world. And clearly this is not something that McCoy hallucinated. And he's calling up, you know, very nonchalantly telling the captain and Mr. Spock what he saw. I mean, you know, we do see Kirk in a bit stop shore leave from happening when he sees it for his own eyes. But he should have taken action a lot sooner. And a lot of this couldn't have been avoided if he did.
well, I think, because I think at this moment, they don't believe that this is true. Like they think that he's just joking. The only way I think this makes sense, and it's not in the episode, it's just what I'm putting in. I think they're being drugged on some level. I don't think they're mentally in, because I don't think their behavior makes 100% sense. I think they are just a little bit high. That's what I think.
But who's drugging them?
Well, the planet. I think you beam down to this planet and it makes you just a little bit more accepting of what is going on.
Okay, now, you know what? I'm not going to disagree with that assessment, and here's why. First of all, we, in just a few episodes, are about to see a drug alter the perceptions of colonists and members of the Enterprise in this side of paradise. So maybe there is something to that, because in addition to giving a lot more support to the theories of why people are just taking things not as seriously as they should, this episode was filmed towards the end of 1966, when flower power, the hippie movement, was really going in full swing. And there's no doubt that a lot of what was in the air, so to speak, was being influenced by the hippie movement and the counterculture. And that could have been an influence on this episode.
I think it's very possible, because the thing, and we'll get into it, is that there are ways that people respond that are very interesting, let's say.
That's a McCoy pill. A little mystery sugar coating. He wants to get me down there. Afraid I won't swallow it.
And Kirk's like, I'm not going down. And he says this while rubbing his own neck. One thing I want to point out, we've said how great Jerry Finnerman is. There's like some weird cinematography errors, I would say, in this, particularly in this scene. One of the things you do when you're shooting is I might have 3 lights, 5 lights, 10 lights lighting up a scene. And what if I put 3 lights on you right now, Scott, what I would see behind you is 3 different shadows. And that is bad in cinematography. And so what you do is you flag the lights, which means putting like a black thing in front of them in such a way that all of the shadows disappear, that you only see a shadow that you want to see. And there's a moment where you see 3 shadows on the wall in Kirk's quarters when Spock is talking to him that just seems like, and what I wonder is, often when you're shooting on location and on the set, well, they might be having 2 crews shooting at the same time, and Finnerman's only in one place, and he's probably out on location. And so he's got an assistant who's shooting this scene because it's not as important. And therefore that's why this lighting mistake happens. That's what I think. I have no evidence of it at all. And then Spock, and I love this, Spock says,
"We have a crew member aboard who's showing signs of stress and fatigue. Reaction time down 9 to 12%. Associational rating norm -3.
That's much too low a rating.
He's becoming irritable and quarrelsome, yet he refuses to take rest and rehabilitation. Now, he has that right."
And Kirk cuts him off and says,
"We found..."
Crewman's right ends where the safety of the ship begins. Now, that man will go ashore on my orders. What's his name?
Jim Kirk. The look that Spock gives Kirk, and the look on Shatner's face, just that like, oh. And then as Spock is saying,
"Enjoy yourself, Captain."
There's like a sly smile, like, okay, you win.
What I wonder is, did McCoy and Spock set this up together?
Oh, well, I'm going to say yes to that. I think that
so
they were in cahoots for sure.
I think like we saw in Conscience of the King, they are perfectly capable of working together to handle James Kirk if they have to.
And they are very capable. Not only are they capable of working together, but they are motivated to work together when it comes to the best interests of their captain and their friend.
And now we have 2 crew members down on the planet who we've never met before. We have Rodriguez and crewman Martine. And she is interested in the beauty of the surroundings. And Rodriguez, much like me, is still trying to do his job.
Well, wait a minute, Steve. You say there are 2 crewmen here that we've never met before. Oh. There's actually only 1 crewman that we never met before. So Rodriguez, who we did not meet before, was played by actor Perry Lopez. But Angela Martine is played by Barbara Baldwin, who played the widow in Balance of Terror.
That's, you know what? As soon as you said that, I'm like, oh no, that's the same woman, isn't it?
It's the same. In fact. So by the way, don't feel bad, because while they were filming this episode, Barbara Baldwin's character had a different name. And somebody spoke up, this person who the somebody is not named, but someone said, wait a minute, wasn't she in Balance of Terror? And they went, oh yeah, that's right. So they gave her the same name, Angela Martine. And that is why I guess she got over Robert Tomlinson's death pretty quick.
I think that's why I didn't pick up on it, because it just is so like, she's so important in Balance of Terror, and she's very different in this episode. And Kirk and Barrows beam down, and they head over to find where McCoy is, and this is where I totally understand why this went over schedule and over budget, because there are a lot of shots that are very complicated. And this one right now is we're on a dolly and we're tracking with a camera at a low angle, looking up at Barrows and Kirk as they're walking. And it's a fairly long dolly shot. And that just takes a long time to set up. And we find McCoy. And as we walk over towards him, we hear a sound that we're going to hear many times, which is kind of like a wind chime. And it gives you a sense that there is something going on.
We talked about how when the crew beams down to a planet, sometimes we hear like a planet vibration, a planet sound. So they wanted the sound of this mysterious planet to sound different than all the other planets like Talos 4, but they wanted it to sound like there was something like magical in the air. So that's why they gave it like a wind chimey kind of sound.
And Kirk right away makes a joke about, have you seen any rabbits? And then very quickly we find out this really isn't a joke, because there on the ground is a giant rabbit's footprint. And now Kirk is realizing something's going on, and he halts the shore leave. There was a party about to beam down, and he stops them. And McCoy's going, why don't stop this because of this?
You're the doctor. Doctor, can you explain this?
Oh, no.
Neither can I. I admit it looks harmless. Probably is harmless. But before I bring my people down here, I want proof it's harmless.
That's the Kirk we know for sure.
Exactly.
Right. He snapped back into it. Like while I was on the Enterprise talking to McCoy, he was like kind of playing around with him. But now he's like, well, no, he was right. He saw something.
And right at that moment, we hear a gunshot. And Kirk draws his phaser, and now we have another huge long tracking shot that's I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in Star Trek, which is, it is a really, really fast dolly move of going backwards as Kirk runs towards whatever this sound is. And it's a really exciting camera move, but again, it takes a long time to set up. And it's so fast that I go, wait, was this on a dolly or was this on a truck?
Yeah,
I mean, it's really hauling on this
and
shot.
it's also smooth, like it's not rocky at all.
Yeah.
So you're right. Bob Justman loved the creative choices that Robert Spar made on this episode because, that's a scene that we never really saw and never will see again. This episode just feels so unique. But that's one of the reasons. I mean, there were a lot of reasons why Robert Spar went a day over schedule. One of them was that certainly the complicated shots. The other certainly because Roddenberry was on site and they had to wait for him to type out pages for the revised scenes.
Well, and you're now shooting, instead of being on the lot, you're shooting on location, and just transport time is, I know where Vasquez Rocks is. It is a good hour plus drive from LA. Mm-hmm. You've been there, I assume.
Oh, of course. You kidding?
I figured you made a pilgrimage to Vasquez Rocks.
Absolutely.
And I don't know exactly where Africa USA was. Do you?
It was about 40 miles north of Los Angeles.
So that means just in terms of travel time, you've got an hour plus both ways. If they had to do company moves during the middle of the day, that kills half a day. I mean, it just really adds a lot of time in your schedule. So they heard this gunshot, they run, and there is Sulu calmly doing target practice. And he is super excited. And he says,
"Isn't it a beauty? Haven't got anything like this in my collection. I know it's a crazy coincidence, but I've always wanted one like this. Found it lying right over there."
And there's a huge smile on his face. And I just go, it's just what you said before. They really developed this character of Sulu. He loves botany, fencing. He collects antique guns. Like, he's just this is a fascinating guy I wish we had more of.
Absolutely. And by the way, just make note, Steve, that he fired 4 shots from that gun. Okay. 4 shots. So keep that in mind because I'm going to bring it up again later.
I will definitely remember it. Kirk has him hand the gun over. And
I love he's just like, Sulu's like so like full of so much glee. He's like bragging about the gun. He's like a kid in a candy store. And like a scolding parent, Kirk is like, "Mr. Sulu." And he extends his hand. It's so funny, the interplay between Kirk and Sulu.
Well, this is where I think they're just a little bit high because Sulu should have, as soon as he found the gun, called it in. Because this is a really, really weird thing. And he certainly shouldn't have started immediately just firing it. That is just slightly strange behavior.
There's so much to this episode where if you really, really think about it and hold it up under scrutiny, like starting with what we talked about, how Kirk was on the Enterprise and McCoy was on the planet saying, "I just saw this thing," and they didn't take him seriously enough. So if you go along with the Steve Morris theory that everybody on this mysterious planet is high, then I am definitely willing to let things slide, like Sulu finding a gun, like there being a samurai out there and, Finnegan popping up, because it makes the most sense that there's something about the planet that is intoxicating our crew into making bad judgment calls or not acting fast enough.
Well, and what is Kirk's line when he takes the gun? He says,
"I'll hang on to it. The fresh air seems to have made your trigger happy."
Oh, there's your proof.
Well, what's funny, well, let's keep going and we'll discuss this as we go. We see McCoy and Kirk kind of walking back to the glade. And as they walk, this strange antenna pops up and is tracking with them, observing them. So we, the audience, are now ahead. I mean, pretty much we knew since we saw the rabbit. We heard McCoy say, "This reminds me of Alice in Wonderland." And then he saw the rabbit. I think we as the audience have a pretty good idea of what is going on, you know?
Absolutely, yes.
I love this moment.
Well, it could have been worse.
How?
You could have seen the rabbit.
But see, that's what I mean. I love that the levity.
Me too.
I love that you know, the sort of letting their hair down and, you know, the being more comfortable with each other, you know, letting go of the chain of command and being friends. And they're on a planet. I mean, even though there's something definitely weird is going on, maybe the fresh air is making everybody trigger happy. But I love that kind of levity and that moment between Kirk and McCoy. It's a nice moment.
What's the matter, Bones? You getting a persecution complex?
Well, yeah, I'm beginning to feel a little bit picked on, if that's what you mean.
And then this response is part of my epiphany about Captain Kirk.
Okay.
He says,
I know the feeling very well. I had it at the academy. An upperclassman there. One practical joke after another, and always on me. My own personal devil, a guy by the name of Finnegan.
And you being the very serious young cadet.
Serious? I'll make a confession, Bones. I was absolutely grim, which delighted Finnegan no end.
okay.
All right. Let's hear your epiphany, because I had one too.
All right. So let me ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say, with your vast knowledge of Star Trek history and of James T. Kirk, is the most important, most pivotal moment for Kirk at Starfleet Academy? What is the biggest thing that ever happened?
The biggest thing that ever happened to Kirk at Starfleet Academy, for one thing, I would say, well, for starters, reprogramming the Kobayashi Maru so he could save the Enterprise.
I think that is the number one thing in Kirk lore. Obviously, it's one of the most important things in Wrath of Khan. It's something that we discuss and establishes who his character is. And that character of the guy who reprogrammed the Kobayashi Maru because he didn't believe in the no-win scenario, that's like, yeah, that's Kirk.
That's our Kirk. And by the way, do I get props for getting that 100%, right?
100%. Yes, absolutely. You do. But I have to say, I had no doubts that you were going to get it. I had the utmost faith in you. And I think if you watch 2009 Star Trek, what it says, and now that Kirk is slightly different because his background is very different, that says he was that way from the beginning. We see him as a kid stealing a car and driving it off a cliff. And then we meet young Chris Pine, and he is aggressive and arrogant and cheats and doesn't follow the rules and all that. And we're like, yeah, that's Kirk, because that's who we see Kirk as. I don't think that's who this Kirk was. This Kirk was absolutely grim. And let's talk about the things that we've heard about his character, where no man has gone before.
Hey, man, I remember you back at the academy. A stack of books with legs. The first thing I ever heard from an upperclassman was, watch out for Lieutenant Kirk. In his class, you either think or sink.
Okay.
And now we're hearing, so what's the chronology here is, as a plebe, he was so serious, he was absolutely grim, and he was picked on by this guy Finnegan. And what we're going to see is he holds a fantasy that he's held for a long time about finally kicking the tar out of Finnegan, which means he didn't stand up to him then.
Well, so what are you saying?
I'm saying Kirk was on some level a nerd.
Okay. All right. Now I'm going to, just so you know,
yeah,
I am with you on this, and I'm going to take it one step further. You pointed out that Kirk was a stack of books with legs. In his class, you either think or sink. Who said those words?
Gary Mitchell.
So does that mean that Gary Mitchell also picked on James T. Kirk back in the academy?
Well, what we talked about with Gary Mitchell was he was Kirk's sort of aggressive friend who took him to the bars, and I think he did pick on him. And we also have in the chronology that there is Kirk the plebe, who gets picked on by Finnegan. And then there's Kirk the student, who has Finney as his teacher, who later surpasses Finney. And in court martial, we talked about all those lieutenants in the bar that Kirk had blown past and their jealousy of him. Another thing that happens in court martial that I've never thought about, I always just let it fly past me. In the trial, they ask who is capable of reprogramming the ship's computer. And those people are Lieutenant Commander Finney, Mr. Spock, and James T. Kirk. They put Kirk's computer abilities right up there with Spock. Now, Kirk never shows that. But in fact, he was a stack of books with legs. You either think or sink. I think the Kirk who is in the academy, was the hardest working, hardest studying, smartest. I mean, the guy's a genius, but we always see his genius as something he comes about naturally. He does everything with ease. And I think that's because he actually worked his ass off and was super, super serious and grim and studied computer programming. I think he read every single book about chess before he could beat Spock at chess. I think there's a guy who studied and worked really, really, really hard, I think the Kobayashi Maru isn't the symbol of who Kirk was in his whole life. I think the Kobayashi Maru is the moment that he became Kirk.
That's a great point. Because from that point forward, he never believed in the no-win scenario. Kirk always won, or most of the time. He didn't win in Charlie X.
Sure.
But still, I completely agree with your establishment of when Kirk became Kirk, of when his character really kicked in. He was a stack of books with legs. He knew everything about computers. He was a nerd. So only a nerd could reprogram the Kobayashi Maru. And his acceleration to the captain's chair was definitely the source of jealousy and envy on the part of everyone else in Starfleet. But I'm just going on a little tangent with regards to Finnegan's place in Kirk's life in the Academy
100%.
And Gary Mitchell's place. Like, where do Kirk and Gary Mitchell and Finnegan fall in? Like, if Kirk and Gary Mitchell were like going out to the bars and Gary Mitchell was the one who wanted to stay out later because Kirk had to get back and wake up early and study for a test, then where's Finnegan? Was Gary Mitchell friendly with Finnegan, or did Gary Mitchell stick up for his good friend Captain Kirk when Finnegan went too far?
Well, the timeline is a little bit wonky because we know that he was a plebe with Finnegan. Well, that means it's his first year. And Gary Mitchell describes him as Lieutenant Kirk, who's an instructor. So there's some time between those things. Mm-hmm. But what I see now is that there is an evolution here. And maybe this is kind of how I felt is that being shy and studious to some degree, I always like, if I could be in charge, I know I could do a good job. Is that I think Kirk had that belief in himself, but he didn't have the courage as a plebe to stand up to Finnegan. It took some time. It took some experiences with Gary Mitchell. You know what I mean? Finnegan's a bully. I mean, to be really, really clear, and we're going to get to it, Kirk is a person who was bullied as a kid. I never had that, even though I'd watched Shore Leave dozens of times, I never connected the fact that this is a guy who really, really picked on Kirk in a horrible way, and he never fought back until
now
Shore
he does. He does now, for sure, yeah.
And what's interesting too is, what were all us nerds? Were we the popular kids? No, we were the smart, studious kids who were frequently picked on.
That's right.
Is that even though Kirk is the person we wanted to be, part of why that is because he was us, Scott.
Yep.
Kirk was a nerd who evolved and took over. Like, what I think he did is, I think at a certain point he went, I'm trying to think of how to say this without a bad word. I want to say is he went, but I'm not going to say that. So I think at a certain point, Kirk just went, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm going to be the person who I know I can be. And I'm going to do the Kobayashi Maru. That's what I think.
I completely agree with that. And it's another look, establishing Kirk as a nerd who turned into the person he is, the person that we have just, because we've been watching Star Trek all our lives, he's been such a role model, such a hero, someone that we aspire to, someone who always did the right thing, whether it's coming up with the Kobayashi Maru and then, coming up with the Corbomite maneuver. The same person who was smart enough to outsmart the computer was also the same person who was also smart enough to outsmart Baylock. And, the same person who would tell Zephyr Cochrane, we're on 1,000 planets and spreading out, and give one of his inspirational speeches or say that risk is our business. That Kirk was all of those things and is all of those things. but he was all of those things because he started out being so smart, so hardworking, and being such a nerd, and being smart enough to reprogram a computer and to ultimately get in the captain's chair faster than anybody else.
And I'll tell you what I like about this theory is that the sense of Kirk is always that he does things with ease. And what I like about this theory is that he earned it. Is he worked really, really, it seems like, and this is true, I'm sure you know this in your profession, and the people that I certainly know, is that there are all these people who, man, they come out and they're a great actor or they're a great writer, and it looks easy. And what you don't see is the thousands of hours they spent trying to get there. You know, and it's funny, I'll say one more thing, and I know we've gone on this tangent for a long time, is, as you know, I've done martial arts for a long time. And I don't know if you know this, but there is a strange subset of nerds that are martial arts nerds. Because doing martial arts is exactly the same thing of studying physics or of, you know, all the things, or computer programming. It's a thing that is boring, and you have to get on the mat and do it over and over and over and over again. And you obsessively try to do this thing to get good at it. And then when you see a good martial artist and they do things with ease, you're like, wow, you make it all look so easy. And it's because you don't see the 10,000 hours of struggle and pain and failure. And I think what I've realized about Kirk is that he is the iceberg. Is we see on the surface the guy who acts with ease, and what we don't see is this is a guy who worked his ass off to get there.
Jim!
And there he is. There is our bully, Finnegan.
Finnegan?
Played by Bruce Mars, who around the time of Star Trek also appeared on Bonanza, The Time Tunnel, The Lucy Show, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and he played a part in not just one other Star Trek episode, but 2 other Star Trek episodes. So he was one of the policemen in the 20th century in Assignment Earth. And he also had an uncredited role in the Corbomite maneuver, and he was given that role because he originally auditioned for the role of Mr. Bailey, but did not get that role. Now, as originally written, Finnegan was a meaner, nastier character, but Bruce Mars had suggested to director Robert Spar, to writer Theodore Sturgeon, and ultimately to Gene Roddenberry to make him funnier and more playful. So hats off to Bruce Mars for having the foresight to add some levity to the character of Finnegan, because he is a fun character.
And we are about to enter into a multi-act fight scene. This has got to be the longest fight scene that's ever been on Star Trek. It has to be. It just goes, and as you see, you're right. Finnegan is laughing and giggling and just so full of this crazy energy.
You never know when I'm going to strike.
And I love that, you know, right away he punches Jim right in the face.
And Jim? How's Jim?
Kirk rolls away, comes up on one knee, rubs his mouth. And of course, he's at first goes,
I can't believe it.
It's not possible for you to be here. But this is where I go, I think they're all a little high, because he stopped saying that. And when he gets up, Finnegan says,
Go ahead, lay one on me, because that's what you always wanted, isn't it?
And you see that smile form on William Shatner's face.
Yeah, he's holding his jaw and he's like smiling at the same time, like, oh, it's payback time.
And this is the thing, and I think this is the next clue for the audience about what is going on. This is fun. Even though he just got punched in the face, he is excited about the idea of finally going toe-to-toe with Finnegan. And just as that's about to happen, we hear a scream. And Kirk runs off. And again, it's a really fast dolly shot.
Again, another shift in tone, and also another shift in the tone of the score by Gerald Fried, that Irish themed cue that he puts into his score here. I mean, this is all in one episode, all these different tones that we hear. Like when you hear the score for like The Conscience of the King, Joseph Mullendorf's score, it's very Baroque. It sounds classical, but the score for Shore Leave by Gerald Fried, it's all over the place in all the right ways, because all the different shift in tones in the score are just brilliantly matching the shift in tones of the episode itself.
It's absolutely true. This is really one of my favorite scores. I didn't know that it was, but it's so interesting, some of the stuff that they do. And Kirk runs, and there is Yeoman Barrows, and her uniform has been slightly torn, and there was something that happened, and there was a guy with a cloak and a dagger. And Kirk asks, "Are you sure you're not imagining this?" And she says,
"Captain, I know it sounds incredible, but I did not imagine it any more than I imagined he did this." Pointing
to her torn uniform. And I kind of go, why would Kirk at this point think that she imagined it? He literally just got punched in the face from a dude he hasn't seen for 15 years.
Well, if we stay with your theory that they're all a little loopy right now because they're all breathing in the fresh air. But here's the thing about Yeoman Barrows. So we realized that she had been thinking about Don Juan. Because McCoy points out that it sounds like Don Juan. And she goes, yes, she was thinking about Don Juan. Now, wait a second. So she's thinking about Don Juan as like this romantic character. But what we're establishing here with the fact that her uniform was torn, is this attempted rape? And did Yeoman Barrows, what exactly did she fantasize for Don Juan to rip her uniform?
Well, I think so, because this has now come up multiple times, I think we should, to some degree, talk about there is an idea of that used to be far more common about rape fantasy and things like that are, fairly distasteful to discuss. But because we saw it in the end of The Enemy Within, when Spock says to Yeoman Rand, there was some interesting things about that other version of Kirk, wasn't it? And you and I both went, ugh,
yeah,
that's awful.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
We also have the Dr. Noel who programs Kirk with this fantasy, and it essentially is, I kind of am happier if you don't care about me. That's part of what the fantasy is.
Right.
And I said, man, Dr. Noel has some pretty weird fantasies about Kirk. But then what I should have said is the men who wrote that episode actually have some pretty weird fantasies about Dr. Noel.
Yeah.
There's some toying with the idea of the woman being taken, which is throughout romance novels and all this stuff is something that has been played with that I think grows more and more problematic as we start to become, hopefully, like the crew of the Enterprise, more evolved people.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But it was interesting. Like I didn't think about the sort of the symbolism of the touring uniform until I was rewatching this episode now with a different set of eyes. But yeah, there was a masculinity that was sort of turned up a notch.
And then we ask where Sulu is. It ends up Sulu ran after the Don Juan character, and so Kirk now runs off. Again, we see Van Antenna track with him, and he runs. And I love this transition. He runs directly from the beautiful gardens of Africa, USA, to Vasquez Rocks with some prop plants around to clue us in. And this to me is one of the biggest moments of evidence of they're a little bit high, because he runs into this new space. He's looking for Sulu. His yeoman has just been attacked. There's some serious stuff going on. And then Kirk sees a flower, and he plucks the flower and smells it.
And at that moment, the tone of the score changes again to this beautiful theme, which is Ruth's theme. And it's a score that we've heard time and time again throughout the rest of the series, particularly the love scenes between Spock and Layla Kalomi in This Side of Paradise.
Right.
But Joe Fried's score, once again, right on point. And Kirk can't believe his eyes when we see a beautiful blonde come out from nowhere, practically. And this is Ruth, played by actress Shirley Bond. And she's blonde. Now, elsewhere, Steve, we hear Gary Mitchell talk about the little blonde-haired lab technician. Now, I think we're going with that. That's actually Carol Marcus. But there are a few blondes. It could be Ruth.
It could easily be Ruth.
Now, what we don't know about Ruth is she's not wearing a Starfleet uniform. So she's wearing a very civilian uniform. So maybe that's not the blonde-haired lab technician, but maybe it is.
Again, this goes to what are the other things we know about Kirk and his internal struggles? And one of the biggest ones is no beach to walk on. Is that Kirk made the decision. I think Kirk, as we said, I think he's a self-created person. He decided, I want to be the captain of a starship. That is what I want. And therefore, he made a bunch of choices to get him there. And one of the choices was there were these women, Carol Marcus, Ruth, who he chose not to pursue. And so that heartache is coming out right now. Like, here is his chance to have Ruth back. And she kisses him. And in this moment of him going, how is it possible that you're here? We have reached the end of Act 1. And again, I think these are classic nerd fantasies. I'm going to stand up to the bully who picks on me, and I'm going to get the girl that I didn't get before.
Wow. Yep. Absolutely.
We're back in Act 2, and we're back with Kirk and Ruth. He calls McCoy. There's no answer. And instead of following up on that, because we're in a dangerous situation on a strange planet, he turns back to Ruth.
Ruth, how can it be you? How can you possibly be? You haven't aged.
Again, this is why I think they're a little bit high, because what we've seen from Kirk is he has more than any human around the ability to do what is necessary, despite having been the disease in the naked time, despite being split in two, despite being tortured on the I mean, he was on the Tantalus device and he still managed to do what he had to do. But in this moment, he turns back to Ruth. You know,
and he like actually has a serious conversation with. Now here's the other thing about this predicament that the crew they find themselves in. So McCoy is seeing the rabbit, and Sulu picks up the gun, fires the gun four times, and now Kirk has been punched in the face by his archenemy from the Academy, and now he is embracing romantically with someone who just might be one of the loves of his life. What we're not really taking into account here is that in the prior adventure, they were just dealing with a situation where the previous captain of the Enterprise was forced to live out illusions that were so real he couldn't tell the difference between fantasy and reality.
Yep.
Now the Enterprise crew itself finds itself on a planet where they are now living out fantasies that may or may not be real. And they should have absolutely have had a red flag early on that maybe this is all an illusion. They should have been certainly much more careful and much more alert.
Kirk here.
Did you find Mr. Sulu, Captain?
What?
Did you find Mr. Sulu?
No. But I'm sure he's all right.
Sir? Are you all right?
Yes, I'm fine.
And the thing, too, is all of these illusions are dangerous. Mm-hmm. You know, not seeing reality is dangerous. That's something we've established over with the man trap all sorts of times in the course of this show. And now we're not feeling that way. And he gets a call from Rodriguez, who's saying he sees birds. And Kirk's response is,
"Don't you like birds, Mr. Rodriguez?"
For the sake of this episode, it's almost like you really got to treat it like a standalone episode and let a lot of things slide. Because if Kirk is with Ruth and he's like so drawn to her and so caught up in the moment, how would Kirk have reacted if he was the one taken prisoner by the Telosians and forced to live out fantasies with Vina? Would he have been as strong as Pike was, or would he have caved into his feelings a little too soon?
Well, these are the things. Okay. And I had to say, of course, we're speculating. We're way beyond where the show is, obviously. But here's what I think about this. I think there's two differences. The first difference is like in the naked time, Kirk can snap out of the thing that no one else can snap out of. A, because he'd already been split in two in the enemy within. And B, because his ship that he loves is about to be destroyed and all of them are about to die. There's no such horribleness about to happen here. Right now, he's just got this old flame that he wants to pursue. So the situation is very different. And the other thing I just have to go back to, I think these are better drugs. Like, I think I think they're all feeling real good. And I'm not going to say that I have any experience with anything like this because, of course, that would not be appropriate. But if I did have some experience, I would say there's certain times where the worst thing you can do is not accept what's going on. And the best thing you can do is just go with it, man. You just got to go with it.
Yep, for sure.
But Kirk does really start to get, snap himself out of it again.
He says, like, basically, I got to go,
Yeah.
But Ruth says,
You'll see me again if you want to.
And now we see McCoy and Yeoman Barrows. I think DeForest Kelley is so great in all of this. And I think the connection with Yeoman Barrows is fantastic. I love
they have
the
great
two of them
chemistry.
together. Yeah.
Yep. They have really, really good together. Mm-hmm.
McCoy is being so flirty and so romantic. And again, this is where I go, I don't think they're feeling the way I don't think they would behave this way. I think people are too nervous usually to be as forward as they are being right now. You know, she talks about it's like a fairy tale and she should be dressed like a fairy tale princess and he says,
but then you'd have whole armies of Don Juans to fight off. And me too.
Is that a promise, Doctor?
I mean, that is very, very forward.
Very forward. And you're right. Maybe they are drinking a little bit too much Kool-Aid on this planet.
And they take hands. And then in the next moment, we see the dress that she described. And again, they should go, wait, you just described that dress and now that dress is there. Clearly, this is what's happened, but they don't do that. And what I love is the way she says the line. She says,
oh, Doctor, they're lovely.
She says it as if he gave them to her. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
he is just looking at her with just the look of total love. And then he just kind of goes, you can see him have the thought of, hey, maybe I should call this in or something. He goes, just go with it, you know?
Look at me, Doctor. A lady to be protected and fought for.
So we get what her fantasies are.
A princess of the blood royal.
You are all of those things. And many more.
When else do you get to see McCoy really show his softer side like this? I mean, to an extent in The Man Trap, but it was all after the fact. It was different. It was from a love that had already happened. Of course, she wasn't even really alive. The only other time you really see this side of McCoy, well, there's two times. First of all, obviously, For the World is Hollow, and I Touched the Sky with Natira of Yanada. But you also see him very complimentary to Miranda in Is There in Truth No Beauty when they're having dinner, you know. But DeForest Kelley, underutilized actor. I'll tell you what else was underutilized in this episode. So we've now seen two fantasies for Kirk, you know, one a love interest, the other getting back at an old bully, and Sulu with the gun and McCoy with the rabbit. But up to this point, you know, we're almost halfway through this episode and Spock is still in the Enterprise.
Yep.
Now, talk about a missed opportunity. What would Spock's fantasy have been? And how different would that have been? Obviously, very different is the answer from that of the other fantasies that we would have seen. And if anybody is going to really give Spock a backstory through a fantasy, Theodore Sturgeon, the writer of this episode, was the perfect person to do it because Theodore Sturgeon just opened up so much to Spock's world with a mock time meeting his family and the Ponfar, and you're seeing Vulcan for the first time. So it's a shame that we never got the chance in this episode to really see a fantasy that is very, very, very different from the other fantasies that we have seen.
That's a great point. I love the moment where he finally convinces her to try on the outfit and she goes, "Don't peek." And he says,
"Dear girl, I am a doctor. When I peek, it's in the line of duty."
And then you know what? He does kind of peek a little bit.
He does peek, yep, when he's talking to Rodriguez.
The communications are starting to go down and he starts to lose it with Rodriguez, who has my Spanish name, Esteban. And we lose Esteban, and then we cut to Rodriguez and Martin, and they are facing a tiger. And then out comes Yeoman Barrows with the romantic music in the outfit, and McCoy looks at her, and it is just, you know, I'll tell you, here's the difference between, it just occurred to me, the difference between The World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky and Man Trap McCoy. That is old, tired McCoy falling in love.
Right.
This is young love.
It's young love. And McCoy is just like everyone else on this planet. Obviously, everyone is being rejuvenated because of this fantasy and because they're on just a beautiful planet. You're right. It's a different
Kirk, again, is calling up to Spock, and we're talking about that these can't just be hallucinations. He says,
one hallucination flattened me with a cloud on the jaw. The other.
And I love that he doesn't finish that sentence. That is, in screenwriting, that's where you do an ellipse. You put 3 little dots, and those 3 little dots is there's something the person was about to say that they chose not to say. And that's one of the great screenwriting tools there is those 3 little dots. And we're losing, again, the communications are going down. And Spock says, should I beam down an armed party?
Negative. Our people here are armed with phasers. Besides, there's yet to be any real danger.
And in that moment, he sees the birds.
He sees the birds.
Yeah. And Sulu is walking along the rocks, and out pops a samurai.
By the way, I mean, come on. I think that's a moment that does not hold up very well at all. Like, why samurai? Because he's Asian? I mean, come on.
Well, it's exactly the opposite of the choice they made to give him a rapier in Naked Time. He could have had a samurai sword, and he said no. And that was a great choice, and that's why this is a weak choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take cover! There's a samurai after me!
That's silly. That's so silly.
And then they see somebody beaming down very, very slowly. And of course, it's Mr. Spock.
So now the transporters are ineffective. Communications are down. So something from the planet is zapping the power from the Enterprise. That's a technique and a plot point that we would see happen in other episodes, like Return of the Archons, where the Landru was pulling the Enterprise down. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's Val from the Apple pulling the Enterprise down. Now, the Shirley planet isn't doing that extreme, but this planet has now effectively stranded the landing party and cut them off from the Enterprise.
And we're back with McCoy and Barrows, who are walking along, and she continues with, man, she's got some serious knight in shining armor fantasies. And of course, what do we see but a knight in shining armor? There's a big black knight, and McCoy has figured it out. I think he goes Shadow of the Gun style. If I don't believe in this, it can't hurt me.
Okay, and that is exactly what Pike was doing in the cage, and what they saw happen in the menagerie.
The difference is that stuff was illusions, and these things are actually real things that are manufactured. Yeah. And he stands up there. I think they shoot it really, really well with the knight charging and the camera pushing into McCoy, and he's saying these things can't be real. And then it hits him, and he goes down, and she screams. Spock tries to shoot with his phaser that doesn't work. Kirk shoots with the revolver.
How many times?
2, I think.
3.
3.
So there's the rub, Steve. So this was a 6 gun, and it fired 7 shots, 4 from Sulu and 3 from Kirk.
Is it bad filmmaking because we didn't count the bullets, or is it the planet that just added more bullets because that's what Kirk needed?
Well, I'm going to say that it was the planet because Kirk wished that extra bullet, and that did the trick.
And then they see McCoy's body, and the reaction of shock and the looks between Kirk and Spock to end Act 2, I think, are great.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing about the way that Act 2 ends. You got to remember that when Star Trek was being shown in first run, DeForest Kelley was not yet a featured regular. So at any point, I mean, even though he was in most of what we saw, I mean, obviously he wasn't in Where No Man Has Gone Before, but he was not in What a Little Girl's Made Of, and he was not in part 2 of the Menagerie. So you know what? It's mid-season.
Yeah.
And what a shocker that are they really going to kill off Dr. McCoy? I mean, he's not a regular. His name isn't on the opening credits.
That's a really interesting thing about watching it first run as opposed to watching how I watched it. Because unlike you, I don't know the first episode that I saw. I don't know what order I saw these things in. McCoy was just one of the main people, so it would never have occurred to me that they were really going to kill McCoy. But if I was watching it in 1966, I probably would have. Yeah. And again, this is where I totally see why this went over schedule. We start in a high angle push in, which is a more complicated shot to shoot. And things have gotten more serious. Yeoman Barrows starts to lose it. And I love that Kirk becomes the captain to get her back under control.
Yeoman. We're in trouble. I need every crewman alert and thinking.
Aye, aye.
And Sulu is looking at the Black Knight, and it's like some weird mannequin.
It is a person wearing makeup. The actor playing the dummy, the knight, it's an actor named Paul Baxley. So there's some deep trivia for you. But the look, the way that they could have just used a dummy. They could have just used a mannequin, but they used a flesh and blood actor to make it look like a mannequin to give it a very eerie, surreal feeling.
I think it's a really good choice because it does look very eerie. And what they say is basically everything, including this mannequin, is made out of the same cellular structure as the plants, that they're all somehow manufactured.
All we know for certain is that they act exactly like the real thing. Just as pleasant or just as deadly.
We're back with Rodriguez and Martine, and there is an airplane. And because he was just talking about an airplane, and she says, "Can it hurt us?" And he says, "Well, not unless it makes a strafing run." And what's the next thing he does?
It makes a striking run.
And they try to run away, and it looks like she gets killed.
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, you don't see anything graphic, but they run away, and then she falls back, and Rodriguez is cradling her. Yeah. So she's either seriously injured or she did in fact die. So.
And we never deal with her again. That's just, I mean, I'm assuming she got repaired and she's totally fine, but
you do see her at the end of the episode. You do see her walk up to Rodriguez, but it happens very, very quickly. It's not enough of an establishing shot that she actually came back. And right as that has happened, McCoy's body has disappeared. All right. Now here's the thing about McCoy's body disappearing. The way it was originally written in the earlier outlines, a rock was going to move and mechanical hands were going to reach out from under the rock to pull McCoy's body under the rock. So first of all, that would have been too expensive to do. So it was Roddenberry's idea to just make the body disappear.
I am so impressed with Roddenberry's cheapness, and I mean that in the nicest way. It's like he's come up with, between the transporters and only talking about the shuttlecraft, and there's so many things, or just reusing the cage, where Roddenberry found a way on this very tightly budgeted show to save a little bit of money. And now Spock's starting to figure it out, because he asked Kirk,
"What were your thoughts just before you encountered the people you described?"
I was thinking about the Academy.
And then we hear that music.
Hey, Jim, baby! I see you brought up reinforcements! Well, I'm waiting for you, Jimmy boy!
I want to punch Finnegan, by the way.
I think that's the idea.
Yeah.
That's the idea, is that not only does Kirk want to punch Finnegan, we all want to punch Finnegan. And this is really the beginning of what turned out to be a 5-minute fight scene that was edited by team number 3 on the original series. But the main editor, his name was Fabian Torgman, and it was Torgman's idea during the structuring of this fight scene to have Finnegan he pops up out of nowhere, like while Kirk is like kind of chasing him. It was Fabian Torgman's idea to have Finnegan keep popping up out of nowhere to give it, again, the feeling of a fantasy and something otherworldly.
Well, and it works so great. And we should say, we mentioned before, but we're at Vasquez Rocks. This is arguably the most important Star Trek location there is, used over and over again. It's used in Next Generation. And of course, it's in Generations. It's used a lot, you know.
Oh, well, I mean, of course, I think we all know that the most famous episode in which it's used is Arena, the fight between Kirk and the Gorn. But it was used again in the Alternative Factor. It was used in Friday's Child. Definitely used in Next Generation as well. It was used in Star Trek 4. And Star Trek and J.J. Abrams paid homage to it in Star Trek 2009 when he made the surface of Vulcan look like those jagged rocks in Vasquez Rocks.
So I liked it so much, I have actually filmed there.
Wow!
I did. I don't know if I've talked about it on this show, but I made one of the first web series ever made. So I made a series called Siren in 2000, so long before there was YouTube or anything else. And it was about like an industrial thief, and we did a bunch of fight scenes, and we destroyed a car. And anyway, in one of the episodes, we went out and we shot at Vasquez Rocks.
Oh, that's so awesome. You shot
fun.
Did you wear like a gold? Did you like reenact a scene from Arena? It's okay if you did. I would have.
I know you would have. It was really fun and special to be there. And I was shooting totally illegally, as much of that filming was, and it was a lot of fun. And as you said, this fight scene goes on, and they had to be thinking about John Ford's The Quiet Man with John Wayne's fight with Victor McLaughlin, particularly because of the Irish thing. Like, it just, because that is one of the most epic fight scenes in the history of film. It goes on and on and on, and this feels like it to some degree.
I think that was a big inspiration for this fight between Kirk and Finnegan. Yeah, I read that it definitely was an inspiration. They filmed the fight scene on days 5 and 6, and Shatner's stunt double actor's name is Paul Baxley, and Bruce Mars was Vince Dedrick.
And you could see it. I mean, you could see it several times. Although Shatner does a fair amount of it, there's definitely some stuff he's doing. And what's funny, and again, this is the lightness of the episode, is Kirk is asking him questions, but he's also smiling. And there's like a moment where maybe Finnegan is going to answer, and then Finnegan cheats or punches him. And what's funny, and this is what's very much like The Quiet Man, is they keep getting knocked down, and you think, oh man, I guess that's the end of the fight. That's not the end of the
No, it keeps going. Like I love that it's not just that the fight keeps going. It's like they fight, then they stop. There's an interaction, then they pick up the fight again, and then they stop, and there's an interaction. It's like they catch their breath. Then the fight keeps going. Yeah. Like that's what's great about it. And the score, again, Gerald Fried, like the score just kind of like, it's like starts to come down, starts to slow down, but even the score is taking a breath, because then the score picks up again when the fight's. And by the way, I just realized that William Shatner's stunt double, Paul Baxley, that was the dummy. That was who played the dummy in the Black Knight costume. Interesting.
Makes sense. And I love the moments where Finnegan says things like,
"You stupid underclassmen. I've got the edge. I'm still 20 years old. Look at you. You're an old man."
He's in his early 30s, and he's an old man. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
And then Finnegan goes down the hill, and he suddenly is in pain and says,
I can't move my leg. My back is broken.
And Kirk, not too sympathetically, says, "Can you feel that?" And of course, Finnegan was just faking it, throws Kirk, the fight goes on. And at this point, it looks like he has knocked Kirk out. Kirk's head falls back, his eyes are closed, and Finnegan says,
"Sleep sweet, Jimmy boy. Sleep as long as you like. Sleep forever, Jimmy. Forever and forever."
Sleep forever. That's kind of chilling, isn't it?
It is.
Sleep forever. And by the way, of course, we have to mention that Kirk did rip his shirt, as is par for the course, because that's what Kirk does.
And it's also, this is the end of the act. So the sleep forever makes us go, oh my God, it's really bad. No, it's not, because we come right back to where it was. And again, the fight, Kirk gets up and the fight keeps going. More fight. Keep
going.
And then this is key.
What's been happening to my people?
I never answer questions from plebes, Jimmy boy.
And Kirk defiantly says,
I'm not a plebe.
This is his evolution from the person he was when he was a plebe to the person who is kicking the stuffing out of Finnegan today.
This is today, 15 years later. What are you doing here?
And this is the key to the whole thing.
Yes, key to the whole thing.
I'm being exactly what you expect me to be, Jimmy boy.
That moment, Kirk gets it. And he gets up. He's like, if you're going to be exactly who I want you to be, then you're going to get the tar kicked out of you by me right now. And he lays a few punches right on the old kisser and sends Finnegan flying. And Kirk is triumphant, victorious, and proud of it.
Yes.
That moment where he's just like, leaning over with his shirt ripped, and that look of like the childlike look of joy on his face, that he did something that he always wanted to do. He wanted to beat the crap out of Finnegan, and he finally did it, even if it's not really Finnegan.
And Spock says,
Did you enjoy it, Captain?
Yes, I enjoyed it. After all these years.
And then he gets it.
He gets it.
I did enjoy it. The one thing I wanted to do after all these years was beat the tar out of Finnegan.
We've now figured it out. We're meeting people and things that we happen to be thinking about at that moment. It's kind of like, look, a bunch of us figured this out in the teaser when McCoy said it's like Alice in Wonderland and saw the rabbit.
Yep.
But you guys have now caught up to us.
Yeah. We figured it out long before the crew of the Enterprise did, but that is because there's something in the air. They're all a little high.
A little bit high. And then I love the moment where they go, yeah, it's really dangerous. We have to really control what we're thinking about. For instance, Rodriguez's tiger.
Oh, the tiger. Can we talk about the tiger?
Let's talk about the tiger.
Okay, well, at one point, William Shatner was like, we got to have a scene where Captain Kirk wrestles with the tiger.
Oh, really?
He wanted a scene where Kirk wrestles with the tiger. So, of course, everybody was like, Bill, I think that's a really bad idea. So at one point, while they were filming the scene where Shatner was close by, he was like 6 feet away, and the tiger got out of its chain. It like slipped off. And Shatner jumped to safety. He jumped on a prop to get out of its way. And then he came to his senses and said, yeah, maybe wrestling with the tiger isn't such a bad, it really is a bad idea. But there was also a scene where they brought an elephant to the set. They were going to shoot a scene with an elephant. The elephant was brought to the set, but they were running over and they were having other production setbacks. So they brought the elephant to the set. They never shot with the elephant. The elephant is not in shore leave. I don't know where that was going to be, but it did get so far as to actually have the elephant on the set.
That's such a bummer because I don't know. I have no idea what an elephant costs in 1966, nor do I know what an elephant costs today, but it ain't cheap. You got transport, you got food, you got trainers, there's a whole bunch of logistics you have to deal with bringing an elephant to set. By the way, Shatner wants to wrestle with the tiger thing. I maybe I'll cut this out, but one of the things I tell to my students is don't just do what your actors say. Actors will ask to do things that are really, really foolish. For instance, I had a student, she's shooting a film. It's the middle of the night and we're very conscious about safety. So we make sure they're not allowed to do stunts and they have to be very careful and they have to get permission to do various things. And in her script was the character gets hit by a car. And so we carefully went over, okay, you're going to shoot a shot of the character and then you're going to shoot the car and then we're going to cut to something else and we're going to hear screeching tires and then cut to the aftermath. I see the film when it comes in and the actor gets hit by the car on camera. And I said, what did you do? Why'd you do this? She said, well, the actor said he wanted to do it. And he said, why don't you just hit me with the car? And so they had someone hit and they did it slow, but I'm like, this is exactly where someone's going to die. It's 2 a.m. You don't have trained people. You just go, just hit me with the car. It'll be fine. And I love, by the way, now we're going to get all of it because we're going to have the plane come in with a strafing run. The samurai's going to jump up. I love Kirk just knocks him down.
It's all coming to a head, isn't it?
And I don't this again, maybe we could just say she's high. But why is the yeoman smiling and happy as she's putting her dress away and getting her uniform back on? She literally just watched McCoy die.
Look, even while Kirk gets caught up in the moment of beating the crap out of Finnegan, he just lost his best friend. Like those emotions. Look, it's episodic TV, it's
sure.
The 60s. It's a different time. They all kind of moved on from that pretty fast.
Yeah.
But you're right. I do agree with you.
And Don Juan shows up and starts to grab her, and Rodriguez and Sulu shows up. Sulu does some ridiculous pseudo martial arts pose. It's terrible. And Don Juan gets out of there. Kirk and Spock shows up, and I love Kirk's.
Brace front, everyone. Don't talk. Don't breathe. Don't think. You're at attention.
And out comes a dude in a robe.
The first time I saw this episode and the dude came out in the robe, I thought it was Darren's boss from Bewitched.
I can see that.
It looks just like the guy. I forget his name. But it's actually, the actor's name is Oliver McGowan. Very, very busy character actor from that day. And we get our answers and loads of exposition here.
Yep. Which is basically, this is an amusement park. And he's going like, we didn't understand that you didn't get it. We thought that you guys were just having fun. And they literally, this very powerful race built this whole planet to give themselves a place to play. And I love that Sulu goes,
play? As advanced as you obviously are, and you still play?
And Kirk, in this very insightful way, says,
yes, play, Mr. Sulu. More complex the mind, the greater the need for the simplicity of play.
Two things about this. Thing number one, this is being said by the dude who was refusing to go on shore leave. He is now saying, no, you need to play. Thing number two, next to this and the Organians might be the coolest, super powerful race that we meet on Star Trek. And I think they figured out what the Talosians didn't, is that they have found a way to still, even though they're super advanced, to not ruin their society, to not become evil, or not become like the Charlie X people that seem distant and don't know how to love. These people know how to party. They're having a good time. I would totally hang out with them.
So you know what? That's a really interesting way you put it. Like you get to the end of the episode and you find out that it's an amusement park. Oh, okay. And we just got to be careful with what we think about. But what we're really dealing with here is new life, to seek out new life and new civilizations. Like I mentioned at the top of this episode, this is one of the few episodes where they actually are exploring an unknown, strange new world, and they find new life. And this life, as you absolutely correctly pointed out, is extremely advanced, up there with the Organians, up there with the Talosians to an extent. And in some ways they're very, very advanced, because the race that is making the wrong decisions in this episode, it's the crew of the Enterprise. Yeah. It's our people. It's just another aspect where, like what Kirk says in, I can't wait to talk about this episode in During the Mercy. You think you're the most powerful being in the galaxy. It's humbling to find out that you're not.
Well, and the thing too is, as much as the Organians seem very wise, they don't seem to be having a lot of fun. This dude is totally smiling. He is having a ball.
And you know what? He is Timothy Leary.
Totally.
Turn on, tune in, drop out, have fun, just be careful. He is basically telling the Enterprise crew, turn on, tune in, and drop out.
Yeah. That still doesn't explain the death of my ship's surgeon.
Possibly because no one has died, Jeff.
Cut to McCoy with two ladies on his arms in outfits.
Now, why the two ladies?
Man, by the way.
Well, yeah. Why the two ladies? Like, why doesn't he just walk out? Why does he have two women on his arm? And where were they before he walked out of the shadows?
Well, I think a sober McCoy would know that he probably shouldn't have two women on his arms in front of the woman he was literally just romantically flirting with a few minutes before. But high McCoy didn't have that thought.
So this whole episode is on a different plane, because our heroes, our crew, is high. There's something in the air that is making them loopy, it's acting like a drug, that is making them make questionable decisions, that is impairing their judgment. And that is why we are able to embrace so many of the things, so many of the questionable motives and reactions that everybody has.
Well, here's where I'll disagree. I don't think they made questionable decisions. I think they make great decisions for themselves. Yes, there is things like getting killed by the night. That it was the not believing in the hallucination. That was the wrong decision.
Right.
Kirk beating the tar out of Finnegan was the right decision. And what I think is, and this is, put this the right way. This is the thing about altered states. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not saying that I've ever experienced any of these things. I have, but the thing is that sometimes they can teach you things that you couldn't get to another way. and that there's a reason why your favorite band in the world, the Beatles, that their music changed when they started to experience some of these things, because you can look at the world in a different way. And the fact is, my guess, based on what I've seen, I don't think McCoy would ever have flirted with Barrows the way that he did. And it was great that he flirted with her the way that he did. I think having your inhibitions taken away, seeing things different, actually can help you connect with people in ways that you couldn't have before. And sometimes you could take that experience and it will actually change who you are going forward. You know, and this is the 60s. There's a lot of horrible bad sides to doing drugs. And we see what happens to those people from the 60s, to the hippies. As we moved in the early 70s, things get real, real bad. But that doesn't mean they didn't learn some interesting things along the way.
Absolutely.
I love all of the beat work between Barrows looking at McCoy and seeing the women and him kind of realize. And she goes over and it's like, no, he's mine. And one of the women goes to Sulu, and the best choice is the other one goes to Spock.
Right,
That's
right.
the
And
best.
Spock kind of reverts to that wise ass that we see at the end of, like Mud's Women. And it's just a shame, and I never thought about this before until watching it again. It's a shame that we never got to see Spock on the planet with Kirk and McCoy the whole time, so that we could have seen a fantasy of Spock play out. So my question is for everybody listening, is that if you were going to write your own scene of Spock in Shore Leave, what fantasy would you like to see Spock play out in the alternate version of Shore Leave? Let us know. Go to Enterprise Incidents, our Facebook page, and comment and let us know what you think.
I can't wait to hear people's responses. And I want to add one other thought to it.
Yep.
Is the fantasy from the human Mr. Spock or the Vulcan Mr. Spock?
Ooh.
Or some combination of both?
Well, we cannot wait to hear and read the reactions that you post on our Facebook page. So please let us know.
And basically, let's have some shore leave. He calls up to the ship. He's like, tell the crew to prepare for the best shore leave they've ever had.
But Steve, Kirk is not going back to the Enterprise. He's going to stay on the planet for a day or two with Ruth.
Yep.
The question is, what's he going to do with her?
I don't have a lot of questions about that. I got a good feeling I know what he's going to do with her. And we're back on the bridge. And this one, I think this one is so nice, is that, McCoy, Barrows, Sulu, Kirk, they come in, Kirk sits in the chair, they all gather around him, Spock comes up, and the giggling and the happiness of what they all just experienced, and Spock going,
Did you enjoy your rest, gentlemen?
Yes, we did, Mr. Spock. I think we did.
Indeed we did, Mr. Spock.
And you know what? They're acting. They're still on a high. They're still on a high. They still got the giggles. They still got the giggles from the Shore Leave planet. And by the way, this ending, with everyone gathered around Kirk sitting in the captain's chair, sharing a moment of levity, sharing a moment of humor. This is a quintessential Gene Coon ending to a Star Trek episode. Yeah. These types of endings that we would see in Star Trek for like the next year and a half or so, up and even beyond to the point after Gene Coon left the show, because a lot of what he did stuck around, and he wrote into the third season under a pseudonym named Lee Cronin. But again, this is another big influence where Gene Coon made his mark on Star Trek by ending most of the episodes he produced on a moment of levity and lightness and humor and warmth.
So Scott, what are the reactions? Did our cast and crew, what did people say about this episode?
Well, Robert Justman, our associate producer, when the episode was finished filming, he said, I think Shore Leave was probably the most entertaining Star Trek show we have produced to date. I am probably alone in my opinion, but I am telling the truth as I see it. Much more recently, Bruce Mars, who played Finnegan, said, God, it was so much fun. It was great on the set. DeForest Kelley was extremely nice. Nimoy was a little removed, very contained, not outgoing, but he was nice when you would talk to him. I think that's kind of in line with a lot of people say about Nimoy, was that he was in character. I don't blame, who can blame him? What he was doing, playing Spock was a demanding role. And if staying in character helped him achieve that goal, then he did the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what sort of my thoughts on Shore Leave. I loved revisiting this with you. I've always liked the episode. It's always been a lot of fun. I've already said this massive epiphany I've had about Kirk, and I'm really curious if what the evidence we see later on as we explore each of these episodes is going to support that idea or is going to dismiss it. And of course, I'd love to hear what people listening to the show think about who really was the young James T. Kirk. Here's the other thing I'll say about this episode is that I think this episode is about vacation. I say it's about dreams. It's about the Sabbath. It's about rest. It's about stepping out of the rules of society for a moment. And I think this is where the great creative moments happen. I think we go through our daily lives and they're rigid in the stuff that we have to do. I have to do this. I have to do this. And we behave the way we behave towards each other based on the rules of society. And we all obey them. And they work pretty well a lot of the time. And that there are some times where you step out of it. And I'm sure you've had this. You've had some late night conversation with a friend where it just suddenly gets honest, or you've had that moment out dancing or out doing something that's completely out of your comfort zone, and something shifts in you and you look at things a different way. And, you know, and I've been to Burning Man several times, and Burning Man, yes, it has some of the altered things that we've discussed, but it's also a lot of people asking questions about, well, why do we do things the way we do them? And you think about all the barriers that exist between humans, like the barriers between McCoy and Barrows, that he manages to step across and do something that we never see McCoy do almost ever again in the whole series. Yeah. And so I love that we get to see our crew indulge. They're not saving the galaxy. They're not repairing the warp drive or firing phasers or outsmarting a computer. They're having fun. They're dealing with themselves. And I love that.
I completely agree with your assessment. And I just love that this is a very, very unique episode of Star Trek. There's no other episode like it, even though they did entertain the idea, at least Theodore Sturgeon entertained the idea of a sequel episode. He submitted a story outline in 1968 called Shore Leave 2, but obviously that never happened. Although the Enterprise did return to the Shore Leave planet in the animated series episode called Once Upon a Planet, and we actually do see Theodore Sturgeon's original outline where you see mechanical hands reach out from under a rock to grab the bodies. But my thoughts about this episode were, really, I love it more than I ever did. I appreciate its uniqueness more than I ever did. I scrutinize it a little more than some of the other episodes because there are a lot of questionable things in terms of like not seeing the warning signs as early as they should have. But just letting that go and appreciating the levity. I love the confidence that this episode conveys, because it's like, okay, we get it. We know who our characters are. This episode does exude so much confidence. I love the score by Gerald Fried. I love the locations, Africa, USA, and of course Vasquez Rocks. It's an open episode, and it's full of so many ideas that I never even considered your idea that they're being drugged in some subtle way. And that makes such great sense. And that holds up under more scrutiny than anything else. And just like so many episodes we have discussed now on Enterprise Incidents, Shore Leave is an episode that I've always enjoyed, but now I love it a whole lot more.
And we would love to hear your thoughts on Shore Leave. Have you always loved it? Did you hate it? Has your opinion changed over time? Of course, we want to hear your answers to our questions that we're posting on Facebook. So do a search for Enterprise Incidents on Facebook. You can follow the show at Enter Incidents on Twitter, Enterprise Incidents on Instagram. And please subscribe to the show, which you can do on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. The reviews have been absolutely incredible, and we're so grateful and touched for everything you've written. And that means we just want to be grateful and touched more often. So if you would please write more of them, it would make us very happy. We also love to hear your comments on YouTube. And Scott, if people wanted to reach you on social media, how would they find you?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, nice and easy at Movie Mance with a TZ at the end. You can also check out my YouTube channel, which is just Scott Mance. But make sure you follow us on Enterprise Incidents, on all the different social platforms. Make sure you do check out our Facebook page, which is getting more and more followers. We love and we are so grateful for the interaction and the comments we've been getting, which we've been reading here on Enterprise Incidents. So please check out our Facebook page. And like Steve said, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. Let us know what you think. Steve, where can people follow you and where else can we see your work?
Well, they can follow me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. As I've mentioned many times, The Cinephiles is my podcast, my other podcast, which Scott has appeared on. If you like fun comedic episodes like Shore Leave, you might want to check out some of the one of the greatest comedies of all time, Some Like It Hot. We did The Birdcage, and my favorite comedy of all time we did with special guest Scott Mance, and that, of course, is Airplane. So that's at The Cinephiles. But once you're done listening to some Cinephiles episodes, you might want to come back next week for another adventure with the crew of the Enterprise. What's going to happen next week?
Wait, did you say Airplane? Because after the episode we just talked about, surely you can't be serious.
Oh, yes. Well played.
That joke was 55 years in the making, ladies and gentlemen. As for next week on Enterprise Incidents, I am very excited to talk about an episode that I have always loved. Another episode that feels very, very unique and may just have influenced so much of what happened in The Next Generation and beyond, and is also an episode that features one of the all-time great guest starring performances, and that episode is The Squire of Gothos. So please join us next time on Enterprise Incidents, and until then, keep going boldly.